The sun had barely begun to rise, its timid rays creeping over the horizon, while the whole world still basked in the velvety cloak of night. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the air is thick with promise, yet still saturated with the lingering chill. A single rooster let out a confident crow, breaking the spell of silence that hung heavy over the fields and the faint whisper of wind through the tall grasses. But on this particular morning, stillness was about to shatter. On a weathered patch of land, tucked beneath sprawling oak trees and bordered by a swath of wildflowers, there stood a small farmhouse. Its wooden frame had seen better days, gray and cracked, telling stories of sun and storm. Inside, Ben Harper was already awake. A rugged man in his early 40s, he was a farmer through and through. His hands bore the calluses of hard work, though his heart was soft, a loving husband, a devoted father, and a protector of his land. As dark turned to dawn, Ben moved deliberately through the small house. The smells of freshly brewed coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the crispness that comes with a brand new day. With each step across the creaky wooden floors, he made a mental note of the tasks ahead: more planting, mending fences, and checking on the livestock. He loved the rhythm of farm life, the harmony of sunrises over fertile fields, and the gentle hum of nature stirring awake. Yet somewhere, lurking beyond the fields, shadows began to gather. A whisper of danger brushed against his instincts, unfurling like a dark cloud on what should be a peaceful morning. Unbeknownst to him, a notorious band of outlaws were making their way through the rolling hills, their intentions murky, their hearts hardened. Driven by desperation and a tangled web of poor choices, they were ruthless, known for their quick draw and quicker getaway. As he poured coffee into a chipped mug, the bell on the front door jingled softly, almost mockingly. It was a sound that stirred memories of laughter, late-night chats, and warm embraces. But that morning, the air shifted. A knot formed in Ben's stomach. Something felt off. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. He pushed the thought away and turned to the window. The sun now diffused soft light across his fields of corn and beans, yet his eyes couldn't shake the sense of foreboding. As if answering his growing anxiety, a thundering of hooves broke the silence, echoing off the barn walls. A chill swept through him, icy fingers creeping up his spine. He moved to the window, leaning forward to peer into the distance. Dust kicked up under the weight of approaching riders. The outlaws were on horseback, a fearsome sight slicing through the calm of the morning like a knife. The sunlight glinted off metal, a hint of guns strapped to their waists. Ben's heart raced. Every instinct in him screamed to stay and protect what was his. He knew this land like the back of his hand. He could gather his family and hide, but Ben Harper didn't run from trouble. He met it head-on. He bolted for the door just as they drew closer, their laughter spilling into the air, mingling with his pounding heart. Ben moved quickly, adrenaline surging through his veins. He had no time to lose. With resolve more powerful than fear, he grabbed an old rifle from above the fireplace, the wood worn smooth from years of use. He steadied himself, grounding his feet on the hardwood floor, feeling its familiar strength grounding him. The outlaws swung off their horses, swaggering toward the farmhouse, clearly reveling in the sentiment of unease they spread like wildfire. They were a group of 5, gritty and rough around the edges, each adorned in the tattered remnants of what once might have been stylish attire. One of them shouted, a smirk painting his face like a mask. "Nice place you got here. Be a shame if something were too." He stepped forward, confidence brimming, and Ben could feel the tension crackling in the air. His voice was steady, betraying none of the fear that rolled beneath the surface. The ringleader raised an eyebrow. "Just passing through. Thought we might take a look around." He took a step closer, and Ben pushed himself to the edge of the porch. Each click of his boots echoed defiantly in the stillness. "You can turn around and leave." The outlaw's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his face, the first glimmer of chink in his bravado. It was odd, Ben thought, how quickly confidence can erode when faced with someone unwavering. The man's bravado reemerged like a burst of violent wind as he straightened, glaring at Ben with newfound aggression. But before he could make another move, Ben's rifle glinted in the morning light. "Step any closer and you'll regret it," Ben replied, his voice low and firm. "This isn't your land." That was the tipping point. In an instant, chaos erupted. The outlaw raised his hand, snarling a command to his companions. One of them pulled out a gun, but before he could aim, Ben fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was thunderous, shattering the fragile moment like glass. The outlaws, momentarily taken aback, exchanged worried glances. It was one thing to threaten a farmer, but quite another to face a man willing to fight for his family. Adrenaline coursed through Ben, igniting a fire that had lain dormant for too long. A surge of emotions flooded him: fear, protectiveness, and a fierce sense of duty rose to the surface, blending into palpable courage. But his voice trembled slightly, cracking under the weight of Ben's unwavering presence. Ben barked, his authority echoing across the expanse. For the first time, uncertainty reigned in the outlaw's eyes. Ben held his ground, the rifle steady, his heart racing but his mind unwavering. He was a protector not just of his land, but of the legacy he would pass down to his children. The vision of their faces flashed in front of him, their laughter, their smiles. He remembered the moments they spent gathering vegetables from the vibrant garden, the way his daughter clapped with delight when she saw the first glimpse of ripe tomatoes, the way his son tried to mimic his every action with adoring reverence. "You've got one chance to walk away," he barked, his voice laced with a fierce determination that made even the outlaws waver. With breath held, Ben watched as the ringleader's bravado slowly crumbled. One outlaw took a tentative step back, followed by another. The air hung heavy with tension as Ben realized they were all weighing the risk, the promise of stolen goods against the undeniable strength radiated by one stubborn farmer. With sudden fervor, they turned without a word, retreating with a quickened pace. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, punctuated by the rustling grasses as the sun illuminated the empty horizon. Ben could hardly breathe as he lowered his rifle, the weight of disbelief washing over him. Had it really happened? Outlaws coming to his home at dawn, and yet he had stood his ground. A waveform of emotions bubbled up inside him, a sudden mix of exhilaration and shock. He felt like a warrior, the sentry of his homestead. As he stepped back into the house, the warmth enveloped him, but more than that, it was the realization that he had defended his sanctuary that resonated deeper. His children remained at the heart of it all, the very essence of his fight. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing the curious faces of his wife and kids. They looked up at him wide-eyed. His wife whispered, worry curling her brow. "I sent them packing," Ben replied, a mixture of pride and tenderness lacing his voice. "This land is our own." The sun rose higher, illuminating the fields around them, a promise of growth, of safety, and the unwavering bond of family. In that moment, the world felt right again. Unwritten stories were now woven into the fabric of their lives. Ben saw the future in their eyes, filled with the warmth of resilience and love. And as the sun blazed bright above, illuminating every corner of the land, Ben Harper stood tall, a simple man hardened by hard work and tethered deeply to the land he cherished. In the tumult of that dawn, he discovered something invaluable, the true strength of a farmer willing to protect what mattered most. Dawn came not with the soft glow of day, but with a sense of impending dread. A layer of mist clung to the ground like a forgotten secret, muffling the sounds of the waking world. As the sun began its slow ascent, gold and orange spilled across the horizon, but out in the fields of the Harper family farm, the light revealed something else, something sinister looming just beyond the tree line. Ben Harper stood at the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his hand, his weathered face a mixture of worry and resolve. He was no stranger to the early hours. He'd spent nearly every day of his life tending to the land his father had passed down, a tapestry of hard work woven with love. Today, however, felt different, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Only minutes earlier, he'd heard the distant sound of horses, their hooves clipping against the earth, growing louder as they approached. He couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was on its way. A shadow flickered in the corner of his eye, and there, just as he feared, 5 figures emerged from the mist, silhouetted against the shivering light of dawn. Outlaws. Their horses moved like liquid shadows, sleek and powerful, as they advanced toward his home, their intentions cloaked in darkness. Each man wore a grim expression. They were hardened by a life that had taught them to take what they wanted. Ben's grip tightened on the mug, steam curling up like the rising panic in his chest. He caught a glimpse of the lead outlaw, tall and imposing, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his eyes. He moved with a swagger that suggested he felt untouchable, a predator with a keen hunger for chaos. The man shouted, his voice raspy but brimming with bravado. Ben took a deep breath, his mind racing like the wild horses they rode. He had a choice to make. He could hide, retreat into the safety of the house, and wait for the danger to pass. But that wasn't who he was. He was a protector, a husband, a father, and a landlord of this patch of earth. He wouldn't cower when a pack of wolves threatened his flock. Setting the coffee down, he grabbed a weathered rifle from above the mantel, the weapon a symbol of his father's legacy sacrifice to keep the family safe. He had never wanted to use it. The mere idea of violence made his stomach churn. But if today was the day to defend what was his, then that's exactly what he would do. Stepping out onto the porch, the crisp morning air slapped him awake. His heart raced, but Ben put on a brave face. The outlaws dismounted, clanking their spurs against the wooden boards, eyes narrowing on their prey. "Nice little place you've got," the ringleader taunted, pacing forward with a smirk curling on his lips. "Wouldn't want anything to? Get off my land," Ben said, his voice steady, but inside, a whirlwind of dread churned. He aimed the rifle at the ground, a warning shot showed them he meant business. The laughter from the outlaws echoed like a crack of thunder, harsh and meant to intimidate. Another outlaw jeered. It was a gamble, but he felt a flicker of confidence rise up. He had weathered storms and droughts, years of hard toil that forged him into something stronger than fear. "I'm not here to scare you," he replied, his voice low but unwavering. The ringleader's bravado faltered, just a heartbeat, but it was enough for Ben to notice. It was the subtle shift, the weight of doubt. These men were dangerous, they thrived on fear, but they were also human, and every human had a breaking point. Ben's children peeked through the window just inside the door, wide-eyed, scared but curious. He could see their small faces watching him, and that was all the motivation he needed. Whatever these men wanted, it wouldn't come at the cost of his family. Then, without warning, the ringleader lunged forward. Everything slowed down. Ben's instincts kicked in. He braced himself and pulled the trigger, firing a shot into the air. The loud bang shattered the tension, ringing through the stillness like a strike of lightning. The outlaws froze, their eyes widening in surprise, and for a fleeting moment, fear replaced bravado. Ben shouted, his voice rising above the din of his heartbeat. Frantic energy crackled in the air, tension coiling tighter than a spring. The outlaws exchanged quick glances, measuring their options. Ben held his ground, like a guardian angel standing firm in the face of a storm, knowing that retreating now meant losing everything. Finally, the ringleader scoffed, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips, masking the uncertainty creeping into his mind. "You think this is over, farmer?" With that, he turned on his heel, barking orders. The outlaws mounted their horses, retreating into the morning mist, defeated for now. The sound of their departure mixed with the rustling leaves, a ghostly echo fading into the vastness of the fields. Ben lowered the rifle, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He stood there for a moment, every breath feeling heavier than the last. His heart raced, thunderous but alive. The fight had not just been for the farm, it had been for his family, their future, and the very spirit that ran through their blood. Once silence fell, Ben turned slowly back to the house. His wife stood in the doorway, face pale but filled with pride. "You did it," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. He stepped forward, gathering her into his arms, the warmth of her embrace washing over him like a soothing balm. "I would do it again in a heartbeat," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "This is our land." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the day transformed from a threat into a testament of their resilience. Ben gathered his children close, kneeling to meet their worried eyes. "You don't have to be scared," he assured them, his voice a gentle promise. The tension of the morning settled into a quiet strength, the air thick with resolve. They stood together, a small family against the sprawling vastness of an uncertain world. Together, they were unbreakable. But Ben couldn't shake the feeling that the outlaws might return. The hard reality was that danger often lurked just around the corner. Yet as he looked at his family, that familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, a burden he would gladly bear. Days turned into weeks, and as summer ripened, the threat of the outlaws lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Ben kept watch, and while the fields flourished under the sun, so did his sense of vigilance. He worked harder, mended fences, reinforced locks, and when he could, he shared stories with his children about courage, planting hope like seeds in their young hearts. Eventually, the dust of the last encounter began to settle, giving way to routine. The farm took on a rhythm, the life they cherished moving like a steady river. But deep down, Ben remained alert, the memory of that morning etched into his being. Then one fateful evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the sky into a canvas of reds and purples, he spotted them again. Just the flicker of movement in the distance, but his pulse quickened, instinct screaming like a siren. The same band of outlaws, this time closer and seemingly emboldened. He called, voice urgent, as he glanced back at his wife. They rushed toward the house, the weight of fear settling heavy in the air. Ben didn't waste time. He grasped the rifle, adrenaline pumping through him once more. This was not just a warning shot, this was survival. The outlaws advanced, their demeanor more brazen this time, as if emboldened by past encounters. They were back for something. Desperation hung thick in the air, clinking like the metal of the weapons they wielded. The ringleader called, advancing with an unsettling confidence, as if the reluctance he'd shown before had been replaced with reckless abandon. "I told you to leave," Ben shouted, each word a bullet. The outlaw merely laughed, a dark and chilling sound. "You think you can scare us off again?" With every word, Ben could feel the layers of fear peeling back, an overwhelming surge of conviction rising within him. His heart thundered in his chest, and he lifted the rifle, aiming steady, letting them know he was ready to fight for every inch of ground. The tension was palpable, thicker than the summer air. "You want it," he challenged, his voice fierce, igniting a fire in his gut, and then it happened. Like a slow-motion scene in a dramatic film, chaos erupted. The outlaws charged, their guns drawn, but Ben stood resolute. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears, a chant of determination. He fired warning shots, adrenaline propelling him forward. That evening was no longer simply about defending land, it became a fight for everything he cherished. His children's laughter, his wife's gentle smile, the smell of earth after rain, they were all worth this battle. With each pull of the trigger, he pushed back the tide of fear, striking against the storm of threats approaching. And then he heard it, a sudden rustle behind him. A flicker of movement in the doorframe caught his eye, his wife and children looking back at him, fear intermingled with admiration. It was as if they were lifting him up, giving him strength in that moment. That glance was everything. Ben knew then they were not just bystanders in this struggle. They were his reason, their spirits intertwined with his like roots deep in the soil. With renewed vigor surging through him, he fought harder, more ferociously than before. The night roared around them, gunfire ringing and chaos swirling, but through it all, Ben held fast. It was no longer just a farmer's land. It was a sanctuary he would protect with every ounce of strength he had. Finally, as the dust began to clear, Ben noticed the outlaws faltering, their confidence fractured. He made eye contact with the ringleader, his brow furrowed. In that moment, the farmer's resolve was stronger than the outlaw's desperation. They were not just men, they were shadows of fear seeking to steal away what they did not understand. With one last defiant shout, Ben raised the rifle again, and the outlaws paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. It was the moment of truth, the brink of a decision. They turned, scrambling back to their horses, retreating into the darkness, leaving behind only the echoes of their disillusionment. As the dust settled around him, Ben felt the weight of the world ease slightly off his shoulders. He spun around to see his family, faces etched with concern but bursting with pride. They rushed into his arms, a knot of love and relief. His daughter asked, her voice trembling but her grip firm. Ben knelt, pulling them both close. "You are always safe." In that soft moment, surrounded by family and the remnants of the chaos they had just faced, he knew that they had weathered the storm. The outlaws may not have been gone forever. Their shadows could return, but he felt stronger, heartened by the love that anchored him. Together, they would face whatever dawn brought next, one step at a time, one heartbeat after another. The land remained theirs, a testament to their unity, with roots that ran deeper than fear, weaving a legacy of resilience and hope for generations to come. It was just before dawn when the world held its breath, moments suspended in stillness. The soft glow of the first light began to creep over the horizon, brushing against the fields of the Harper farm. Everything seemed peaceful, the air thick with the musky fragrance of damp earth and the distant calls of awakening birds. But on this particular morning, darkness would bring forth more than just the light. In the dim light of the small farmhouse, Ben Harper stood at the kitchen counter, muscles already taut from the day's work that lay ahead. The coffee brewed slowly, filling the air with a rich scent that danced through the room. He had always loved these quiet mornings when the world felt anew, but today, beneath the surface, something felt different. A sense of trepidation crackled in the air. Out in the fields, he could hear the soft rustling of the corn, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The ground felt alive beneath his feet, pulsing with the rhythm of life, yet a nagging anxiety twisted in his gut. He took a sip of the strong brew, hoping it would tame the uneasiness brewing within him. As he gazed out the window, the first rays of sunlight ignited the cornfield, transforming the stalks into radiant towers of gold. That glow was interrupted by an ominous sound echoing through the air, the steady thud of hooves approaching. Each beat felt heavier, darker, creeping closer like the slow approach of a storm. Ben set down his mug, and the warmth of the coffee vanished in an instant, replaced by the cold grip of fear at the back of his throat. He moved toward the door, stepping outside in a quiet determination, his heart drumming in his ears. As he reached the porch, the world became a blur. He focused on the dust rising in the distance. The shadowy figures on horseback moved with purpose, and their menacing silhouettes grew taller as they broke through the mist. 5 outlaws, unmistakably drawn into the orbit of his small and isolated home, each face hardened by years of a rough life. "Look what we have here, boys," growled the largest of them, his voice gruff as gravel, full of mirth and malice. Ben's blood ran cold, but he forced himself to grip the banister, steadying his trembling hands. "You need to turn around," he called, his voice firm despite the fear swirling inside. They laughed, the sound brutish and mocking. The ringleader radiated confidence, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes that only made Ben's resolve harden. And what's a farmer going to do about it? The threat hung in the air, heavy like the storm clouds brewing above. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, reality warping around Ben. He weighed his options, glancing back towards the open door of the farmhouse. Inside and down the hall were his wife Mary and their 2 children, Sarah and Jack, blissfully unaware of the danger looming just outside. Ben's heart ached at the thought of them, and a flash of desperation shot through him. He wouldn't let them suffer for his fear. These men were nothing but thieves, preying on weakness and vulnerability. Just as his mind was spiraling into hopelessness, that internal voice broke through. He was a protector, a father, and he had fought through worse than this. "Get off my land," he spat back, fury igniting a fire that burned deep in his core. His voice boomed with an authority he barely recognized. The ringleader's laughter stopped dead in its tracks, replaced by an expression of real surprise. He asked, stepping closer, the menace palpable now, swirling thick like fog. "I said leave," Ben repeated, raising his chin unwavering. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. The outlaws hesitated, and for an instant it felt as if they might reconsider. But in the depths of their hardened hearts, they were fueled by desperation. The largest man frowned, pulling a revolver from his belt, the weight of it glinting ominously. In that moment, adrenaline surged through Ben's veins, igniting every instinct for survival. He reached inside the farmhouse for the rifle hanging on the wall, a weapon passed down through generations, carrying the weight of his ancestors' struggles. He emerged back onto the porch, rifle aimed high and steady. He roared, the ground beneath him erupting with gravitas. The outlaws exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, but the ringleader gathered his courage, waving his revolver dismissively. "You think you can scare us with that old thing? You underestimate me," Ben warned, his heart racing but his hand steady on the rifle. With the rifle raised, the morning sun illuminated Ben's resolve, contrasting it starkly against the darkness the outlaws emanated. The power of a man defending his family, daring them to make a move. Electricity charged the air. Then it happened. The ringleader lunged. In a blur of movement, Ben pulled the trigger, fear turning to instinct as the rifle barked like thunder, sending a warning shot spiraling into the air. The loud crack shattered the tense silence and the moment erupted. The outlaws faltered, the bravado vanishing from their eyes, replaced by shock. One of them exclaimed, the words laced with disbelief. "Leave," Ben yelled, rising to the challenge as adrenaline surged through his body. In seconds, the ringleader hesitated again, assessing the new reality. He looked at his companions, the moment hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the cornfield swayed in the morning breeze, standing witness to this confrontation between fear and courage. Finally, with his pride shattered, the ringleader turned on his heels, backing away. He spat, lurching for his horse. "Get out," Ben shouted, lowering the rifle only slightly, his heart racing. His grip remained steady, waiting, watching, willing to defend everything he held dear. The outlaws mounted their horses, the echoes of hooves pounding against the earth as they galloped into the distance, disappearing into the veil of mist. Ben lowered his rifle, breath coming in ragged gasps. He felt like a coiled spring slowly unwinding, but a wave of relief flooded over him just as swiftly. He turned and rushed back into the house, where both fear and gratitude danced upon Mary's face. She asked softly as he crossed the threshold. "I am now," he replied, closing the door behind him as if sealing away the danger that had just threatened their home. He gathered his family in his arms, seeking warmth and comfort amidst the shock. "It's okay," he whispered. As their heartbeats synchronized in that moment of solace, Ben felt the weight of love pull him back to solid ground. This fight had been for them, a testament to the strength woven into the fabric of their lives together. Amid the quiet, he allowed himself a smile, feeling gratitude bloom amid the chaos. Moments like these reminded him of the difference they could make when united love, after all, held more power than fear ever could. Days turned to weeks, the harvest came and went, and yet the memory of that dawn lingered like the shadows of dark clouds on the horizon. Ben and Mary found themselves keeping a vigil, glancing toward the road more often than they liked. The outlaws had not returned, but that didn't lessen the feeling of peril. Instead, it burrowed deeper into their everyday lives, a constant nagging presence. And then one evening, as the sun dipped low in a blaze of color, casting long shadows over the land, Ben saw them again. Just a flicker at first, but then unmistakably, the same outlaw band, still riding hard, their faces twisted with reckless determination. "Mary, kids." He shouted, his heart pounding like a drum, urgency lacing every word. The family scrambled, fear igniting their movements, the door slamming shut behind them just as the outlaws closed in. Ben dashed to the fireplace for the rifle once more, fingers trembling, fueled by the raw energy of fight or flight. After all they had faced, after standing strong once, this was a moment of truth. The world braced for impact as he bolted back outside, rifle aimed straight, with adrenaline coursing through him like a wildfire. Ben shouted, voice ringing with resilience, the sun's last rays igniting the tension in the air. Without warning, the ringleader laughed, an unsettling sound that echoed across the dusk. "We've come back for what's ours, farmer." Ben felt a fire ignite in his belly, raw and fierce. Just as he steadied his stance, the ringleader moved and chaos erupted once more. Gunfire erupted, the air crackling with danger. Ben let loose his own shot, the sound clashing against the night, and the battle of wills escalated dramatically. But this time he felt different. A sense of purpose washed over him like rain on parched earth. With each gunshot fired, he drew strength not only from the rifle but from the love waiting inside, the lives he fought to protect. One shot, then another, each roar of the rifle reaffirming his resolve. The chaos intensified as the outlaws pressed forward, but Ben held steady as memories of family danced in his mind. The laughter of his children, sweet whispers of love shared with Mary all the reasons he stood against the rising tide. In the thick of the storm, the outlaws faltered again, confusion washing over them as they realized they were fighting against something far stronger than mere greed. Ben saw the fear in their eyes, recognized the shadow of doubt creeping in. They were not prepared for the fire in his heart, nor could they understand how love could act as a shield against darkness. Finally, as they began to retreat, a sense of vindication washed over him, soothing the tremors in his hands. He watched them turn and flee, their bravado replaced by pure survival instinct. The sound of their retreat faded, and Ben stood alone, breathless but triumphant, the weight of victory settling over him like a blanket. He turned back toward the farmhouse, where Mary and the kids peered fearfully through the door. Shouted, a thrill coursing through him, and he rushed forward to gather them up, to embrace them tightly where they belonged. They were safe for now, a family bound by the trials they had faced together. The shadows may rise again, but Ben Harper knew that light would always break through, guiding them forward against all odds together. As they stood there on their porch with the dark blue sky stretching above them, he felt a quiet strength swelling in his chest, a certain pride in the home they had fought so hard to protect. He was not merely a farmer, but a guardian, a warrior made from love and resilience. With each dawn that came, they built a future even brighter than the light that streamed across their fields, solid as the ground beneath their feet. And amid the tumult of the outside world, the chaos and fear, they stood still, unyielding, a fortress against the tide. Everything they had built, everything they cherished was wrapped in the simple, eternal truth: family was worth the fight. The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the sweeping fields of the Harper farm. The air was crisp and invigorating, filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. It was a morning like any other, at least until the steady thudding of hooves broke the stillness, sending a ripple of anxiety through the tranquil landscape. Inside the farmhouse, Ben Harper was already awake, the rhythmic rhythm of his life waking him before daybreak. He stood in the kitchen, the warmth of the coffee pot reflecting in his tired eyes, filled with visions of planting, harvesting, and everything needed to keep the farm alive. He poured himself a cup, the steam curling up like the memories of mornings past. But today, as he gazed out the window, something felt off. The distant sounds of horses grew louder and closer, breaking the morning's silence. Ben furrowed his brow, feeling a knot twist in his stomach. It wasn't unusual for travelers to pass through, but the urgency in the pounding hooves sent a clear shiver down his spine. Setting his cup down, he stepped out onto the porch, heart racing. The deep breaths he took were mingled with a growing unease. With each beat, the unease only escalated as he watched the clouds of dust rise in the distance. He strained to make out shapes through the haze, and as they emerged, the sight was unmistakable: 5 riders galloping toward him, their features obscured by shadows and grit. His heart pounded heavier, each thud matching the tempo of the approaching hoofbeats. Ben could feel adrenaline pooling at the base of his spine, a primal instinct. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that fear is just as powerful as courage, but it can also be blinding. The first outlaw broke through the clearing, tall and burly, with a ragged leather jacket that hung from his shoulders like a warning. His comrades followed, each one carrying a swagger that announced their intentions without words. As they drew closer, the expressions on their faces became clearer, smirks twisted with malice, eyes glinting with mischief. It was an unmistakable menace. "Look what we have here," the leader called out, his voice a deep rasp echoing slightly over the fields. A little farmer all alone. Ben felt a rush of anger intermixed with fear, and he pushed it down, channeling that fire into confrontation. He yelled back, trying to inject authority into his voice. The leader laughed, a guttural sound that twisted in the air like a serpent. "Just passing through, heard you might have something worth taking." He looked at his companions, a glint of challenge in his eyes. "I won't ask you again, you've crossed onto my land," Ben replied, gripping the railing of the porch, determination boiling within him. This was his home, a sanctuary he'd built with sweat and tears. He wasn't about to let anything or anyone tear it apart. "Oh, we'll ask you twice and maybe 3 times, the ringleader shot back, sneering. His comrades joined in, laughter rippling through their ranks, a mixture of bravado and menace that only seemed to embolden them. With every mocking chuckle that danced in the air, Ben's heart raced faster, fear knotting tighter in his guts. His fight-or-flight instinct screamed for him to retreat, but retreating wasn't an option. The faces of his family, his wife, Mary, and their 2 children flashed through his mind. Safety, security, family, these were worth fighting for. He shouted, raising his voice as he narrowed his eyes at the intruders. The leader's expression shifted momentarily, a flicker of uncertainty mixed with incredulity. But behind that bravado lay a deeper layer of human instinct. They were outlaws, sure, but they were also men who faced danger on their own terms, and Ben understood in a way that they too were driven by desperation. The ringleader said, glancing back at his fellow outlaws who exchanged uncertain looks. He stepped forward, confidence returning. "We don't have to make this a mess." In a flash, Ben made a critical decision. He had to show them he wasn't afraid. "You want valuables? I've got something that's more valuable than any ring or coin," he declared, taking a slow step forward. "My family is in that house." That struck a nerve. For a split second, the bravado faltered again. The outlaw's laughter fell silent. There was something in Ben's ferocity that rang true. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a warrior, one fighting for what mattered most. Now came the pivotal moment that would define everything. The ringleader shifted, hesitating. A blink of breath, but then he raised his gun slightly, trying to regain control of the confrontation. "You think you can scare us with words? You've got spirit, I'll give you that." With fear pulsing through Ben's veins, he took another decisive action. He dashed back into the house, heart racing, rifle in hand, not out of cowardice, but to protect his own. He had inherited the weapon from his father, a relic surviving more than just bullets and storms. When he returned to the porch, the outlaws were still there, the leader grinning, brazen in the face of confrontation. But Ben's grip was steady. "I don't want to scare you." Confusion washed over the ringleader's face, a flicker of doubt sparking behind his bravado. Perhaps it hadn't dawned on him that the stakes had just risen. This wasn't about valuables anymore, it was about pride and survival. "Last chance," Ben growled, the rifle aimed but still held steady. The moment stretched like taffy, tension hanging in the air, thick and heavy. Then suddenly the ringleader burst out laughing again, but it sounded hollow this time. Just then, one of the men stepped forward, his face pale as he yelled, "This isn't worth it." But the leader waved him away, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. In a split second, Ben's heart surged, feeling like a lightning bolt had struck through him. The strength he found in that moment was deeper than the rifle he aimed. It radiated from the weight of his love for his family. He shouted again, each word resonating with a steady resolve. As the leader opened his mouth to retort, the sound of gunfire blasted through the morning air, but it was not Ben pulling the trigger. It was a shot fired from the outlaw's revolver, echoing like thunder. Time slowed as Ben moved sideways instinctively, narrowly avoiding the bullet. He fired back in that very moment, a warning shot high into the air, a primal roar of defiance bursting from his soul. It rang through the stillness, and for a split second, the entire landscape seemed to hold its breath. The outlaws froze, unnerved, uncertainty crashing over them like an ocean wave. Ben felt a surge of adrenaline, but deeper still was the fear of the thought of family lost. He gripped the rifle tighter and steadied his aim. "Get out," he demanded once more, his voice sharp and unwavering. The leader hesitated, the bravado beginning to slip away from his eyes. He looked back at his companions, and perhaps for the first time, fear echoed in their expressions. The stakes were as high as they'd ever been, and they knew it. This was not merely a farmer willing to fight. This was a family man standing up for everything he held close. Finally, in a flicker of a second, the ringleader turned, panic writ large across his face. He yelled as they scrambled to mount their horses, panic overshadowing their confidence. With the weight of victory settling heavily on his chest, Ben watched them flee into the rising sun, the dust swirling in the air behind them like ghosts. As silence returned, his breathing slowed, adrenaline ebbing away, leaving behind a wave of shock and relief. "Ben," Mary's voice trembled from behind him, catching his attention. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, eyes wide with fear and concern. "I am now," he replied, the weight of love coursing through his veins. He dropped the rifle, rushing to hold her tightly, sinking into the warmth of her embrace as if it could wash away the fears of the morning. Peering past their bodies to see his children emerging from the hallway, he knelt, pulling them close. "You all are safe," he murmured, brushing his fingers through Sarah's hair while holding Jack's hand tightly. "They're gone?" Sarah asked, her bright eyes filled with trepidation, innocence tainted with fear. Ben looked at her, remembering the weight of the choices he had made just moments ago. The assurance in his voice was sincere, a vow stitched from the very fabric of love that held them together. The household settled into a tentative peace after that day. Ben remained vigilant, checking doors and keeping his rifle within reach, but most importantly, he focused on his family. They shared stories and laughter, building a barricade of warmth against the lurking shadows of fear. Days stretched into weeks, and the scars of that dawn began to fade, but the fear of the outlaws lurking in the backdrop never truly left them. The tension hung thick in the air, but love flourished amidst it. But one armistice morning, just as dawn began to unfurl itself across the fields, the quiet stillness bore a familiar sound. Ben stiffened at the kitchen table, stirring his coffee, and the deeper echoes of hooves grew louder, taunting him like a siren's call. Shouted, voice thick with urgency as he dropped the cup, the ceramic shattering against the wooden floor. He bolted to grab his rifle, dread pooling in his stomach. The outlaws were back, and they weren't riding away this time. He could see them breaking through the mist, galloping with an unsettling confidence. As he pushed through the door, the once peaceful dawn transformed into an ominous battlefield. He stood firm on the porch, rifle ready, his heart racing but his mind clear. He shouted as the riders pulled up. The ringleader sneered, his previous bravado morphing into an unsettling confidence. "I'm not trying to scare you," Ben replied, his voice steady and resolute. Those words hung heavy in the air, vibrating with the weight of truth, as if the morning itself paused to listen. The outlaws laughed, but this time it was venomous, dripping with more malice than before. One of them yelled, the echo laced with bitterness. And just like that, chaos erupted again, an explosion of angry voices, mounting fear, and the adrenaline of impending violence. Shots fired into the air, ricocheting through the silence that had enveloped the dawn, and Ben grasped the rifle tight. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. This was not a fight against just them. It was a fight for everything he held dear. As he pulled the trigger, his heart raced. He bellowed. With each shot fired, the earth beneath his feet felt heavier, and yet strangely lighter. This time, it felt like he was standing on unshakable ground. The outlaws, who once held the upper hand, faltered, confusion creeping into their ranks. Their facade of bravado chipped away, revealing what lay underneath a primal fear, the awareness that they were outmatched by a force they couldn't quantify. Seeing their hesitation, Ben pressed forward, stepping off the porch, driven by the unwavering love for his family. He cried, heart pounding, courage surging through him like wildfire. The band of outlaws hesitated again, this time their eyes vacant, recognizing the reality of their choices. They turned their horses, panic seeping into their movements as they galloped away, retreating into the shadows they had come from. Ben stood tall for a moment, breathless from the immediate battle. He didn't want to celebrate, the darkness lurked too closely, but relief coursed through him. He had faced the storm again, and together they had weathered it. Turning back, he rushed toward his family, who had watched from the door, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. Mary exclaimed, tears glistening in her eyes. His heart swelled, knowing that this fight had deepened their bond, forged connections with every challenge they faced. "We're safe," he promised, pulling them all into his arms. As they huddled together, the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the fields, transforming the chaos into a promise. There would be more struggles, more dark silhouettes lingering at dawn, but as long as they stood united, they would face every challenge head-on. In the end, it wasn't just a fight for land, it was an affirmation of love. The legacy of their lives, laughter, and sacrifices woven together like the very fabric of the earth. And in that moment, surrounded by family and love, Ben knew he would always rise to the occasion, not just as a farmer, but as their protector, willing to hold the line against any threat that dared to cross them. The sun had barely kissed the horizon, just shy of dawn, when the stillness of the Harper farm transformed into a canvas of chaos. Birds sang their early morning songs, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Everything appeared peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of pounding hooves shattered the tranquility. Ben Harper stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window as he washed the breakfast dishes. The steam from the coffee pot curled around him like a warm embrace, oblivious to the danger creeping across the open fields. He caught a glimpse of the vibrant colors of the sunrise, but the alarm bells in his mind warned him that something wasn't right. The thudding grew louder, thick and insistent, reverberating against his chest. He set the dishcloth down and walked to the porch, heart pounding in sync with the chaos encroaching on his peaceful morning. Dust rose in clouds as figures emerged from the tree-lined 5 men riding hard, their faces cloaked in shadow. Ben squinted, breath catching in his throat. Outlaws. He recognized that swagger, that too-certain tilt of the hats. They were known to terrorize small farms like his, searching for easy gains, folks they deemed easy prey. The knot in his stomach tightened. He shouted, his voice strong despite the curling fear within. "Get the kids inside." His wife Mary appeared from the house, her face pale but resolute. Behind her, their 2 children, Sarah and Jack, peeked out with wide, innocent eyes, unaware of the nightmare unfolding in their backyard. Mary's voice trembled as she gathered the children close, instinctively protecting them. He barked, urgency straining his voice. He hated the idea of scaring them, but instinct was taking over. He turned to face the approaching outlaws, anger flickering like lightning in his veins. As the riders drew nearer, Ben felt his fists clenching at his sides. The leader, a burly man with a leathery face and eyes like coal, threw back his head and laughed, the sound dripping with arrogance. "What's this?" Ben took a step forward, heart racing but grounding himself within. "You're trespassing. Turn around and leave." The outlaw's laughter echoed off the barn walls, a twisted melody that made Ben's skin crawl. "Oh, I think we'll stay." He glanced back at his crew, a menacing grin spreading across his face. Ben shouted again, his voice booming like thunder against the fragile calm. He was no stranger to danger. He'd faced storms and droughts, but this was different. This wasn't just weather, this was a people, a threat that sought to rob him not just of his belongings, but of his life. Mary ushered Sarah and Jack back toward the house, the children's wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Ben's heart ached. He couldn't let them see him scared, and he couldn't let them become victims. The ringleader dismounted, rolling his shoulders and cracking his knuckles like a wolf preparing to attack. "What are you gonna do about it, farmer?" "Not today," Ben replied, summoning every ounce of defiance within him. The rifle above the fireplace loomed large in his mind, an heirloom that symbolized far more than just metal and wood. It encapsulated his lineage, the struggles and triumphs of those before him. The outlaw stepped closer, a glint of eagerness in his eyes. "You know what they say about farmers, don't you?" In that moment, Ben's fear shifted to determination. He would not become a statistic, another cautionary tale whispered in the dark. He took a deep breath, focusing on how this moment would echo through the lives of his family. "You should turn around and leave." The outlaw's laughter morphed into a derisive chuckle. As his eyes flashed, Ben felt the fire rise within him. The ringleader's smile faltered ever so slightly, and Ben seized the opportunity. In an instant, he dashed into the house, heart pounding, thoughts racing. He grabbed the rifle from over the mantel, the coolness of the wood grounding him even as adrenaline surged like wildfire through his veins. Emerging from the house, he stepped onto the porch, the rifle steady in his hands. The sight was startling. The band of outlaws who had swaggered so confidently moments before now hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. Ben called, his voice calm but carrying an authority that stopped them in their tracks. Behind him, Mary stood in the doorway, her expression a mosaic of fear and resolute strength. The children clung to her, wide-eyed, the tension twisting in the air palpable. Ben's heart swelled with love for them, the fight for his family over his possessions. The leader stepped forward, his bravado faltering. "You don't want to do this." Ben's heart clenched. He understood desperation. He faced it on bad harvest years when the ground remained parched and barren. But there was a line, and this was his home. "I've worked my whole life for this," he stated emphatically. The outlaw blinked, frustration etching lines across his brow. For a brief moment, Ben thought he'd won him over. But the leader's eyes flicked toward his companions, and in that moment desperation returned like a darkness that threatened to engulf everything. He shouted and chaos erupted. Ben felt the wave of adrenaline crash through him. The first shot rang out, the outlaws were armed. He ducked instinctively, feeling the bullet pass overhead as other shots echoed like thunderclaps around him. In the deafening racket, he squeezed off a warning shot into the air, a desperate plea for them to realize they were not invincible. But the outlaws surged forward, the fire igniting in their eyes. Ben stood firm on the porch, heart pounding. He couldn't retreat. Retreat wasn't an option. He shouted, pulling the rifle to his shoulder, leveling it toward the ground. As the dust erupted around him, he fired once more, shooting toward the ground just ahead of the approaching outlaws. The gunshot reverberated like a bell, and he watched the tension ripple through them. A moment of hesitation hung in the air, and in that split second, uncertainty gripped the outlaw leader's heart. He yelled, lifting his hands like a man deflecting a blow. The power dynamic shifted, and Ben seized the moment. Enough, you think you can come here and claim what's mine? Each word fueled by love, desperation, and a fierce determination. He'd faced worse in his life, the uncertainties of farming, the conflicts of rural living, but this was a battle for everything he cherished. The outlaws paused, exchanging nervous glances, the fear becoming a tangible entity in the air. Even the bravest of hearts can falter when faced with unwavering resolve. Leave now, or I will not hesitate to use this, Ben growled, determined to stand his ground. He made sure they could see the seriousness etched across his face, knowing this moment could change everything. As the leader hesitated, Ben pressed forward, emboldened by their fear. I've taken care of this land my whole life, it's mine. With that proclamation, the momentum shifted. The outlaws could feel the wall of determination he had erected unbreakable as the roots of the crops he nurtured with his hands. They slowly began to back away, fear overtaking them once again. One of them exclaimed, the fight apparently leaving them. Ben shouted, exuding authority that rang in the cool morning air. Time seemed to stretch as the outlaws turned to flee, hooves pounding against the ground, dust swirling behind them like the fading echoes of lost bravado. As silence returned, Ben let loose a deep breath, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. He had done it. He had defended his family against a tide of darkness. But the victory didn't come without its scars. The fear stayed etched on Mary's face, and the kid's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. He turned to them, wrapping them in a tight embrace, feeling their warmth infuse him with strength. He asked, his voice a low rumble, trying to mask his own fear. I was scared, Sarah whispered, burying her face in her mother's dress. Jack nodded silently, clenching onto his sister's arm. I know, Ben murmured, kissing the top of their heads, but you're safe now. As dawn's light grew brighter, uncertainty still settled over the Harper farm like a gray cloak. Later that day, Ben sat at the kitchen table, gears turning in his mind. Could they come back? Had he truly deterred them? The stillness filled with unsettling thoughts, echoing memories of fear and resistance. Weeks passed and life continued, the fields growing luxuriously under the sun. But in the quiet of every night, Ben's heart still raced at the thought of danger around the corner. Every rustle in the trees, every flicker of shadows, ignited something deep inside him, a fight ready to awaken at the slightest provocation. The nights turned bright under a full moon, and shadows stretched long through the fields. Mary too felt the weight. She often lingered near him during those quiet hours, their hands clasped tightly, sharing silent agreements to protect what they had built. And then one fateful morning, the familiar sound of pounding hooves jolted Ben awake. He shot out of bed, instinct honed sharp as a blade. He yelled, adrenaline pumping as he reached for the rifle. What? Mary asked, eyes wide, fear etched across her face. Ben commanded, slamming the door shut behind him as he stepped outside. As he squinted into the morning light, the sight confirmed his worst fears. The same group of outlaws had returned, now creeping toward the farmhouse with a more sinister intent, their eyes glinting greedily under the rising sun. The leader called, swaggering as he dismounted, his smile twisted with malice. Panic surged through Ben, but he forced his emotions back, recalling the previous encounter and the victory they had snatched from the jaws of fear. The outlaw replied, drawing his weapon with a flourish, challenge painted across his rugged face. The air thickened with tension, a moment suspended in time as the world around them narrowed. Ben held his rifle steady, aiming it straight at the intruders. I won't let you take anything else from me. Come on, boys. The leader waved his gun slightly, aiming over Ben's head just as the other outlaws readied themselves. In that split second, Ben felt a rush of resolve combust within him. This was about more than survival. This was a fight for love, a fight for family, a fight rooted deep within his soul. He fired the rifle, the sound echoing through the morn's light like the crash of thunder. The outlaws ducked slightly, their bravado faltering even as they unleashed their shots in response. Bullets whizzed past him, but Ben held firm, digging in and steadying his breath. The fight erupted. Ben moved as though he dance dipped and dodged, the adrenaline fueling each maneuver. He shot back, his hands steady, heart unwavering, every pull of the trigger a prayer for his family's safety. The outlaws faltered, that flicker of fear flaring back to life in their eyes. Their hesitation was palpable as they glanced at each other, realizing just how deep their threat had become. He drove them back, one step at a time, pouring every ounce of courage into every shot he fired. He shouted warnings, pushing them further away with his resolve, willing them to understand that this was not just a house they were violating the sanctity of a home. As the sun climbed higher, the ringleader finally grasped reality, panic twisting his features. He shouted, turning his horse just as the others stumbled to retreat. Watching them flee, Ben felt the rush of victory wash over him as fresh waves of relief enveloped his heart. He yelled, his voice reverberating through the fields as silence descended once again. Once the distant sound of hooves faded into nothing, Ben collapsed against the porch railing, trembling with aftershocks. He gripped the rifle tightly, letting the adrenaline slowly ebb away but still feeling the remnants of fear tightly coiled in his gut. Mary rushed forward, holding the children closely, her expression a mixture of worry and pride. He sighed deeply, heart still racing. It wasn't just me. The weight of their survival lingered in the air, the realization settling that victory wasn't just about standing up against the outlaws. It was about uniting, a bond that could fend off any darkness. They had weathered the storm together, and through every encounter they had forged their strength. In that moment, as they stood on the porch together, breathing the fresh morning air, Ben understood. They'd encounter storms ahead, just like every farmer does, but the heart of a family can outlast any tempest. And while each dawn might bring uncertainty, their unwavering spirit would always shine brighter than the clouds. Together, they felt invincible. Together, they belonged. And that was all they needed to face whatever the world threw their way, armed, as always, with love. The air was thick with tension as dawn approached. The first light of day was a pale wash of color, creeping slowly over the rolling hills surrounding the Harper farm. It was one of those mornings where the world felt suspended in time, holding its breath as if anticipating something monumental. And indeed, something was coming, a silent storm in the form of 5 outlaws riding towards the heart of that quiet piece of land. Ben Harper stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, feeling the brisk morning air whip against his face. He loved this time of day, the stillness, the promise of a new beginning. After years of hard work, he had built something beautiful here. But that serenity shattered as the distant sound of hooves turned into a cacophony of thunder. His heart raced and instinct kicked in. He knew those sounds all too well. The stories of outlaws, men driven by desperation and devoid of morals, had been whispered in town. They terrorized anyone in their path, looking for easy targets to loot or scare. And now, here they were, bearing down on him like vultures circling their prey. Ben took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He called back into the house, his voice steady but urgent. "Get the kids inside." Mary appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from sleep-dazed to alarmed in an instant. She asked, concern knitting her brow. "Outlaws," he replied, already striding toward the edge of the porch. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The sun began to cast long shadows over the land, anxiety coursing through Ben's veins. He took in the sight of his wife gripping their children, Sarah, with her wild curls and big eyes, and Jack, still clutching his favorite toy. Without thinking, he brushed past Mary and stepped down onto the creaking wood of the porch, his heart racing with a primal instinct. Ben spotted the outlaws as they galloped closer, their silhouettes growing sharper against the glowing sky. The leader was a hulking figure, dressed in a tattered coat that flapped like a flag of defiance. He held his head high, reveling in the fear they were about to unleash. He bellowed, his voice booming over the distance, dripping with arrogance. Fear clawed at Ben's insides, but beneath that fear was something sharper, determination. "You're on my land," Ben shouted back, his voice rising above the chaos in his chest. The outlaws laughed, a sound that crackled through the morning air, cutting deeper than any knife. Their grins widened, revealing teeth that looked all too hungry for mischief. The leader said, edging closer with swagger. Ben felt a rush of anger pulse through him. He had worked too hard for this land, invested too much of himself to let it be taken by men who reveled in fear. He challenged, stepping off the porch. The ringleader's sneer momentarily faltered but quickly returned. He gestured to his companions. "A farmer's going to teach us a lesson." Ben's grip tightened around the railing. He could feel the wooden splinters digging into his palms, grounding him. He yelled, his voice firm and unwavering. He felt like he was standing on top of a precipice, heart pounding, facing an overwhelming abyss. The leader stepped forward, his bravado slipping just a notch. "Or what? You'll shoot us." Behind him, he heard Mary whisper, "Ben, please." But Ben could not back down, not when the safety of his family was at stake. He had inherited a rifle from his father, a piece of history that spoke of resilience in the face of danger. He took a step toward the house, adrenaline surging through him like electricity. He ordered, rushing toward the living room. He grabbed the rifle, letting that sense of protection envelop him like a warm blanket. As he emerged back onto the porch, breathing heavily, he aimed it at the ground, sending a clear message, a warning shot. The sudden crack split the air, and for an instant the laughter stopped. The haze of confidence evaporated as Ben felt the weight of authority settle on his shoulders. His heart raced, pumping courage into his veins. "You're outmatched." For a moment, the outlaws hesitated, confusion flickering in their eyes. The leader looked back at his companions, uncertainty replaced by a sudden anger. He snarled, eyes narrowing. Ben held his breath, the tension as thick as the humid air around them. This could either end in violence or give them all the chance to walk away. Mary's face flashed through his mind, along with the bright smiles of Sarah and Jack. He couldn't let fear win. "Turn around," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. The leader scoffed, anger boiling close to the surface. "You're just a farmer at dawn." "Then you'll find out what a farmer can do when pushed," Ben replied, determination hardening his resolve. In that vital moment, a spark shifted in the air, a realization that they were not just thieves, they were men facing off against a wall of fierce loyalty. The outlaws remained frozen for just slightly longer than a heartbeat, and then chaos erupted. The leader pulled his gun, his movement fueled by fury and desperation. "Fool," he yelled. The crack of gunfire rang out like a bell tolling in a graveyard, and Ben dove instinctively, hitting the dirt just as bullets zipped over him, singing through the air. The adrenaline in him roared to life, fueling his instincts as he rolled and raised the rifle in quick succession. He shouted, feeling the rush of love for his family, his heart beating wildly as he fired back a warning shot into the sky, the sound echoing across the fields. The outlaws paused, caught off guard. Fear stirred amidst their bravado, rippling outward like a shockwave. The leader shouted, the bravado crumbling as they felt the tension shift. Ben steadied himself, pulse racing, sweat trickling down his brow. He yelled, each word resolute. The standoff stretched on as the air crackled with tension. Ben could feel the outlaws weighing their options, uncertainty clawing at their confidence. He raised the rifle again, heart pounding against his chest. The leader hesitated, glancing around at his men, the power dynamic shifting ever so slightly. Realization crept in that they might not win this fight, and turned to flee, the outlaws spurring their horses into a retreat, galloping away like smoke dissipating in the breeze. Ben stood tall on the porch, chest heaving, disbelief dawning upon him. Had he really done it? Had he protected his family from those men? Relief washed over him as he heard Mary rush forward, the front door flinging open. She reached him, enveloping him in her arms, shaking with a mix of fear and pride. "I think so," he breathed, feeling the warmth of her embrace. Jack asked, eyes wide and curious, and Sarah stood close beside him, fear still lingering in her expression. "They're gone," Ben replied, kneeling down to gather his children into his arms. The murmur of a crowd, a mix of tension and disbelief, began to settle over the farm. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, shifting from a pale glow to a brilliant golden hue, their home transformed. Yet amidst this beauty, Ben knew the dangers would not simply fade with the sun. In the days that followed, the Harpers carried on with life, but an undercurrent of alert vigilance replaced the peace of their routine. The fields held whispers of the clash that had unfolded, and stories spread like wildfire through the town, afraid and hopeful at once. Ben watched as the news echoed through the community. Bravery against thugs became a rallying cry. He was approached with warmth, pats on the back, and cautious questions, but more importantly, a kind of respect that lingered in the air. But deep down, every smile felt shadowed by a nagging worry. Although they were safe, quiet moments turned explosive with uncertainty as dusk painted the sky with crimson hues. Ben frequently checked both doors and windows, moving through a constant state of alertness, reminding Mary and the kids that they were not alone. They were stronger than fear, they were united. And then, weeks later, right before dawn, the nightmare returned. He awoke to the sound of hoofbeats echoing through the morning mist again, a cacophony that sent a chill racing down his spine. Heart sinking, he nearly jumped out of bed. He shouted, urgency throbbing in his chest. "Get the kids." Mary was already up, her face pale but determined. They had rehearsed this scenario 100 times in their minds, but the reality slammed against them like a savage wave. "Ben, it's them," she whispered, fear dancing in her eyes. "I need you to take the kids inside and lock the doors," he replied, a firm grip on the rifle. "What? No." She grabbed his arm, desperation seeping into her voice. "I can't let them hurt you," he commanded, already moving toward the door. As he stepped outside, a wave of fear crashed over him, but he pushed it away. He wouldn't let them take his family. He wouldn't let fear win this time either. Riding toward him were the same outlaws, but their demeanor had changed. They were gnarled by rage and desperation, more violent than before. The leader bore a grim smile, eyes glinting with a determination that turned the air thick with hostility. He sneered, drawing his gun without hesitation. Ben felt his stomach drop as he mounted the porch, steadying himself despite his heart hammering in his chest. He shouted again, aiming the rifle. As the outlaws surged forward, the time for reason was gone. Chaos erupted once more, gunshots reverberating in the air like a dark symphony. Ben fired back, the tension surging through him as he fought against the storm. Each roar of the rifle was a declaration, a stand against injustice, a commitment to protect his family. In between shots, his thoughts raced back to his kids, their laughter, their love, the life they built together. He wouldn't let it be torn apart. The outlaws pressed, but this time something burned brighter within him, a fierce resolve to defend the sanctuary of his home. In their eyes, he could see their desperation too, but that didn't weaken him. It tightened his grip, strengthening his aim. Finally, in a moment of fleeting hesitation, the leader flinched and Ben felt the tide turn again. The rifle rang out in a warning shot, resounding through the thick air as the outlaws, startled, began to retreat. Ben pressed forward, heart racing but composed, adopting a stance that screamed defiance. Leave. He roared, watching as the outlaws finally turned, galloping away into the mist, their menace dissolving into the dawn. As silence filled the air, Ben lowered his rifle, taking deep, ragged breaths. Relief washed over him in waves. They had fought back the darkness once more. He turned to see Mary standing at the doorway with the children behind her, fear replaced by pride as she rushed to embrace him. She exclaimed, tears glistening in her eyes. "This time it's over," Ben promised. The strength he felt coursing through him was more than a victory. It was a reminder of what they had built together: love, determination, resilience. They stood united, intertwined in something far more powerful than any outlaw's threat. As dawn broke fully, brushing the fields with golden light, the power of what they had faced settled upon them. They were not just surviving, they had become warriors for their family. With each dawn that followed, they forged ahead, stronger than ever, holding the promise of what it meant to love and protect fiercely. Outlaws may come and go, but the heartbeat of the Harper family would remain steadfast, a bright flame against the encroaching darkness. And with that insight, every future dawn became not just a blessing, but a promise to face whatever came next together, forever standing strong against the tides of uncertainty. The sun was just beginning to rise, its warm glow spilling over the horizon like honey, illuminating the rolling hills of the Harper farm. Yet long before the first rays pushed through the trees, Ben Harper was already up, already busy. The smell of coffee filled the small farmhouse, mingling with the earthy scent of the fields outside. It was one of those mornings when the world felt alive, promising freshness and hope. As Ben moved about the kitchen, his hands were steady and familiar with the routine, the rhythm of chores ingrained in his bones. He poured the last drops of coffee into the chipped mug, the steam swirling up, carrying warmth and comfort. He could already hear the chickens stirring in the coop, the soft clucking harmonizing with the rustling leaves outside. But then, like an unwelcome thundercloud on a perfect day, a distant sound broke the calm, the steady thud of hooves closing in. Ben paused, a frown creasing his forehead. It wasn't unusual to hear the sounds of travelers, but there was something urgent, almost predatory, about the beats that sent a jolt of apprehension racing up his spine. He took a step outside onto the porch, squinting against the rising sun. Dust kicked up in the distance, billowing like shadows against the brightening sky. As they drew closer, his heart sank. There were 5 of them, outlaws, unmistakably riding hard toward his home, their silhouettes sharp against the glowing horizon. Panic flared momentarily, but Ben pushed it down. Fear wouldn't save his family. He called back into the house, his voice steady but urgent. Mary emerged from the hallway, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. She asked, glancing toward the approaching riders. "Outlaws," Ben replied, moving to the edge of the porch, determination replacing his earlier trepidation. "Ben, please," her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. He insisted, fear fanning the flames of his bravery. He stepped down from the porch, feeling the earth beneath his feet as a tether to reality. As they neared, one of the outlaws raised his arm, laughter spilling out like a taunt. "Look what we found." His eyes sparkled with menace, and the others joined in, grinning at Ben like wolves eyeing a lamb. Feeling a raw surge of anger, Ben squared his shoulders. "You're trespassing." The words felt powerful as they fanned out from his chest. The leader of the outlaws dismounted, swaggering toward him, clearly reveling in the intimidation. "What are you going to do about it?" he jeered, drawing closer, flanked by his companions who snickered under their breaths. "This isn't a game," Ben announced, his tone measured but fierce. The rifle hanging above the fireplace beckoned to him, an heirloom passed down through generations, loaded with history and strength. He stepped back into the house, glancing back at Mary as she ushered the children away, her fear evident but her eyes filled with conviction. He could feel it, the weight of responsibility to protect them surging through his veins. He hurried to grab the rifle, its wood smooth in his hands, and stepped back onto the porch. Standing tall among the chaos now erupting in his mind, he aimed the rifle at the ground to assert his resolve, a warning shot clear and echoing across the morning calm. "Turn around." The outlaws froze. The shift was instantaneous. Bravado was replaced by uncertainty. Ben could see the doubt creeping into their expressions as they exchanged looks, the laughter draining from their lips. The leader straightened, anger sparking fiercely in his eyes. "You think you can scare us with that piece of junk?" But Ben's heart thudded in a rhythm of defiance, pushing back against the fear clawing at his instincts. "You need to leave now." His voice rang with authority, and he felt the ground beneath him shift as apprehension seeped into the hearts of the approaching outlaws. The ringleader stepped forward, hand twitching toward his gun. He shouted, but the color had slightly drained from his face, revealing a crack in his facade. "I'm not afraid of you," Ben challenged, adrenaline coursing through his system. The tension hung in the air as the outlaws shifted, uncertainty mingling with the dust swirling around them. Ben felt like a storm gathering strength, about to unleash his fury if they dared to cross him. Then, with a yell that pierced the morning calm, the leader drew his weapon. Chaos erupted in that second. Gunfire crackled like thunder, a clash of wills tearing through the dawn. Ben fired back, instinct taking over as he maneuvered, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. Each shot was a declaration this land was his. He wouldn't let them take what he had built, what he had fought for with sweat, blood, and love. The enemy staggered back, caught off guard by the farmer's resolve, but their leader roared, pushing forward, the outlaws gaining confidence as they overwhelmed him. He thundered, charging with a reckless vengeance. Ben shouted, steadied by the rifle pressed firmly against his shoulder. He fired another shot, the sound sizzling through the air, and they halted, fear blossoming at the edge of their bravado. One of them screamed. But with each challenge hurled, Ben felt the tide shift. No longer just standing on shaky ground, he was embodying the very essence of protection. There was no going back. As shots rang out, echoes spiraling into the sky, Ben felt something settle deep within him. The fate of his family hung in the balance, their safety his top priority. The firing rang true, each shot a piece of his love and commitment, echoing through the early dawn. He shouted to Mary, his voice breaking through to her as he fought to keep them safe. States were shifting, and shadows extended further into the ambiguity of danger. But in that haze of battle, as he locked eyes with the leader, uncertainty bled into that boldness. The ringleader yelled as he and his crew turned their horses, galloping away into the mist that still clung to the ground. Ben stood at the edge of the porch, rifle aimed and firm, heart thundering in his chest. They were retreating, and with every beat, relief washed over him. He felt so many things in that moment: fear, triumph, and deep, unwavering love for the family tucked safely inside. Turning back to the house, he saw Mary standing by the door, eyes filled with tears of relief and pride, glistening in the first light of dawn. "You did it, Ben," she said, rushing to him, gathering him up in her embrace. Breathless, he sank into her arms. "We're safe for now," he murmured, absorbing her warmth, but somewhere in the depths of his mind, he knew this fight was far from over. Word spread rapidly through town about the encounter, both a cautionary tale and a testament to bravery. Neighbors approached, offering alliance, but the truth was Ben needed to prepare. Each night he kept the rifle by his side, the memories of that morning shadowing their peace. Days turned into weeks, and while the fields flourished under the fall sun, a lingering dread crept beneath the surface. Each rustle of leaves, each clap of wind through the trees rattled his nerves like an approaching storm. The outlaws had tasted defeat, but Ben knew all too well that they wouldn't give up easily. As twilight enveloped the farm, Ben found himself restless, skirting the edges of sleep. He lay awake, considering every rustling sound, every shadow that danced under the moonlight. He felt as if he were being watched, and each time he glanced at the windows, his heart leaped into his throat. The safety they had fought for felt fragile, hanging by a thread. Then it happened. Ben stirred from the restless maze of dreams, ears ringing with unfamiliar sounds, a cacophony of hoofbeats and menacing voices echoing through the stillness. He shot upright in bed, heart racing, a familiar terror clawing its way back into his mind. He hissed, shaking her gently but urgently. She bolted awake, eyes wide, and the first glimpses of dawn were breaking through the window, casting eerie shadows across their room. "What?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Outlaws," he breathed, already moving. He grabbed the rifle, feeling it like an extension of himself, and rushed into the hallway. As he hurried down the creaking steps, he braced himself for confrontation. Moments felt like hours as he reached the porch again, heart pounding in his chest. And there they were, the outlaws charging down the path, led by the same ringleader who had once retreated in shame. They were back, and this time they looked even more dangerous. The leader taunted, his voice gritty with malice. Ben stepped forward, steeling himself, resolve flowing through him like an unquenchable fire. "You don't know what you're getting into," he warned, raising the rifle. Amid the temper of rising danger, the outlaws fired without hesitation, the crack of gunfire splitting the silence of dawn yet again. The world exploded into a chaos of sound and fury, shattering the peace they had fought so hard to protect. The moment stretched painfully as Ben ducked and rolled away, dodging the barrage, instinctively returning fire. His world narrowed down to this fight. Everything else faded away until only the outlaws and his family mattered. Ben shouted, desperation clawing at his voice as he fought against the tide of danger. But in the growing chaos, he saw something unexpected. The outlaws were faltering, confusion flickering in their eyes. Searching for opportunity, Ben pressed forward, relentless and fierce like a storm, but as he advanced, the realization hit him, the leader's face twisted into unexpected fury. He screamed to his men, panic ripped through Ben's heart. He shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He turned just in time, seeing the outlaws charging towards the house where Mary and the kids remained. Ben cried, rage igniting within him. He fired again, but desperation laced his shots now. The shadows of his family loomed too heavily on his heart. He had to protect them. He had to make this right, but as he fired, the world seemed to dissolve. Gunfire erupted, and through the chaos arose a horrifying reality. Two of the outlaws had broken through, heading straight toward the house. Mary screamed, her voice a piercing shriek through the cacophony of chaos. Time slowed as Ben's heart dropped. He had to choose. Protecting his family was paramount, but the danger surged like a wave crashing on the shore. In a split second, he swung the rifle around, aiming for the lead outlaw, adrenaline coursing through him. The moment stretched, trembling at the precipice of despair. He saw Mary holding the children tightly as fear twisted her face. There was no choice to be made. It was instinct, a fight for survival roaring to life. Then he squeezed the trigger, the gun sounding like a thunderclap in the morning air once more. This time, everything hung in the balance, the weight of that decision pressing down on him as the outlaw stumbled back, shock flashing across his features. Yet just then, the leader turned and their eyes locked, an unspoken challenge hanging heavy in the air. Ben didn't know if this was the moment of decision that would turn everything anew. But beneath the chaos, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon, he felt something deeper inside, a fierce love, an unbreakable will against the waves of darkness encroaching from all sides. And as the world blurred in the kaleidoscope of violence and resolve, everything shifted. Would this be the confrontation that broke or made him? In the midst of that dawning chaos, the struggle grew heavy, a line drawn between families, a world of uncertainty hanging in the balance. And in that moment, the battle for what truly mattered was not just about fighting back, it was about holding on to love. But as he pressed forward into the storm, the shadows grew ever closer, and the reality of their lives built to a crescendo. The outcome of this confrontation, hanging by a thread as dawn, continued to rise, a tapestry of choices, courage, and the unknown woven into a destiny that was yet to be fulfilled.